And there are calls for a nationwide uprising in Myanmar. The shadow government calls for people to revolt and for soldiers and police to join them. Now let's stay on that developing story, and for a closer look, David Mathieson joins us. He is an independent consultant on Myanmar. Mr. Mathieson, is the war, this call for a revolt on the military, likely to lead to another upsurge in violence?
It's still really uncertain right now because there have been months and months of really quite extreme violence throughout Myanmar. And I think the National Unity Government, this parallel shadow government, this call for D-Day and for a nationwide uprising, I think potentially heralds an even further escalation of that, which I think will produce an even more violent crackdown on the part of the Myanmar security forces.
Now, more than 1,000 have been, killed by security forces, and the military has shown few signs of compromise, as you've mentioned. So you think that they're likely to retaliate with another crackdown, perhaps with higher intensity and frequency?
I think that's almost likely. I do not think that the State Administration Council has shown any sign whatsoever of negotiating with the National Unity Government or with many other armed forces throughout the country, ethnic armed organisations that have been fighting for several decades. They don't seem willing to compromise. So I think that this call for a nationwide uprising, this D-Day and this further escalation of a war is an act of desperation on the part of the National Unity Government, really calling for people to topple the government, topple the SAC regime, not a government at all. And so I do think that this is a clear escalation of potential violence throughout the country.
You talked about a desperate time for the people, a desperate call for the people, but do you see any other significance in the timing of this call on the military?
It's quite likely that one element of the timing of this is probably because we're so close to the United Nations General Assembly, and potentially also with the appointment of the ASEAN Special Envoy on Myanmar. But it's not clear exactly how this is going to be received in the rest of the world, and especially in the United Nations, if there's a call for an all-out war. And even though the National Unity Government has been calling for codes of conduct to be observed and for civilians to be protected, these kind of wars get very ugly very quickly. And I think that the State Administration Council will spin this in every way they can to depict all of these pro-democracy forces as terrorists, which they've already designated them as.
Now, we know that the shadow government has been jostling for international, recognition. But what do you think it has been able to do so far since it was formed in April this year?
Well, in many respects, it's probably was formed. But it's still very, very weak, as you would expect.
Well, we seem to have lost that very important connection with David Mathieson, but we did get the gist of what he was trying to tell us about developing events in Myanmar. Mr. Mathieson is an independent consultant on Myanmar.